In a small, quiet town, there was a little boy named Ethan, who was different from all the other children. He had been blind since birth, and though he couldn't see the colors of the sky or the faces of the people around him, his world was still full of sounds, feelings, and imagination. Ethan's mother used to say that when one door closes, another one opens, and for Ethan it was true. His eyes were closed to the world, but his ears could hear everything, every little sound, every heartbeat of life around him. Every morning, Ethan walked to school holding his mother's hand, counting his steps, listening carefully to the rhythm of the world. He knew when the baker opened his shop by the clinking of the trays. He knew when the mailman came by the sound of the bicycle bell, and he knew when he reached school by the laughter of children. Sometimes other kids stared at him, whispering things like, "He can't see anything," or "Poor boy." They didn't mean to be cruel, but their pity made Ethan feel small. So he often stayed in the corner of the schoolyard, sitting on a wooden bench near the big oak tree. Just listening, he loved the sound of life, the rustle of the wind in the leaves, the soft hum of the teachers talking in the distance, the rhythm of footsteps across the playground. For him, sound painted pictures. When he heard laughter, he imagined bright colors, yellow and orange. When he heard sadness, he saw dark blue and gray in his mind. His imagination was his sight, and he used it to create his own world. During recess, other children ran and played tag, threw balls, and shouted with joy. Ethan listened and smiled. Sometimes, a kind girl named Lily sat beside him and talked about the world she saw. She told him about the shapes of the clouds, the color of flowers, and the way the sun sparkled on the school's windows. Ethan listened quietly, storing her words like precious treasures. He didn't feel jealous. He just wanted to understand the world through her eyes. But not everyone was kind like Lily. Some kids made jokes. Some laughed at the way he walked carefully, tapping his white cane. Ethan never answered back. He was gentle, patient, and quiet. He believed people laughed because they didn't understand. He forgave them even when it hurt. One day, when the lunch bell rang, everyone ran toward the cafeteria, and Ethan slowly stood up. He counted his steps like always: 1, 2, 3, turn left, 5, 6, 7, until he reached the door. But this time he heard something new. It wasn't a voice or laughter or footsteps. It was music, soft and distant, flowing through the hallway like a dream. He stopped and listened. It came from a room at the end of the corridor. The sound was warm and full of emotion. It made his heart beat faster. He followed the sound carefully, one hand on the wall, the other holding his cane. The closer he got, the clearer the notes became. It was a piano. Someone was playing it with such beauty that Ethan almost forgot to breathe. He stood quietly by the door, afraid to move, afraid the music would stop. His fingers twitched slightly, as if they wanted to touch the air and hold the melody. Every note seemed alive, gentle, kind, and pure. It was as if the piano spoke a language only his heart could understand. For a long time, Ethan just stood there listening, feeling the music enter his soul. He didn't know the name of the song, but it told him stories of light, rain, and hope. In that moment, he didn't feel blind. He felt like he could see the sound, see the beauty hidden inside every note. Then suddenly the music stopped. The silence felt heavy. Ethan stayed still, waiting, but the room went quiet. After a few seconds, he heard footsteps leaving the room and fading away. When he was sure no one was there, Ethan took a deep breath and slowly pushed the door open. The smell of wood and dust filled the air. He took small steps, counting again, until his hand touched something smooth and cool. The piano. It felt magical under his fingertips. He ran his hand along the edge, then touched the keys carefully. One key pressed down accidentally, and a soft note echoed in the room. Ethan smiled. It was like the piano had greeted him back. He pressed another key, then another. Each sound felt like a spark of light. He didn't know what he was doing, but his heart guided him. He could feel the difference between the high, bright notes and the deep, low ones. He laughed softly, a sound of pure joy. For the first time, Ethan had found something that spoke to him, something that didn't care that he was blind. When he finally left the room, he couldn't stop smiling that night. He told his mother about the sound he had discovered. She smiled and hugged him tightly, saying, "Maybe music is your gift, my love." Ethan didn't know what that meant yet, but in his heart, he felt something special had begun. From that day, Ethan started dreaming about music. He imagined himself playing beautiful songs, filling rooms with sound so strong that no one would ever pity him again. He didn't know how or when, but deep inside he felt that one day he would learn to make the piano sing, not with sight but with soul. And though the world still saw him as the boy in the corner, Ethan's heart was already somewhere else, in that music room, with the piano that waited for him, the one that would change his life forever. The next afternoon, when school was almost over, Ethan walked slower than usual. His mother waited outside as always, but this time he told her he wanted to stay a little longer. He didn't say why, only that he wanted to listen to something beautiful again. She smiled softly and agreed. Reminding him to be careful, Ethan nodded, his small face glowing with excitement as he made his way back inside the school building, guided by sound and memory. He followed the same hallway as the day before. Listening closely, the building was quiet now. Most children had gone home. The air smelled of chalk dust and wooden floors. Then, there it was again, that soft, magical sound. The piano someone was playing, slow and graceful, like rain falling on glass. Ethan stopped, his heart fluttering. He moved closer, step by step, until he was standing by the music room door again. The melody danced around him, wrapping him in a warm, invisible blanket. He didn't know who was playing, but he could feel the story inside the song. It spoke of joy and sadness at the same time. It made him want to smile and cry all at once. He leaned his ear closer to the door, afraid to make a sound. Every note seemed to glow in his imagination, bright colors swirling behind his closed eyes. He saw golden light, blue rivers, and soft white clouds that floated gently through his mind. Then suddenly the music stopped. The silence hit him like a wave. Ethan froze, wondering if the player had noticed him. He heard a chair move and the sound of footsteps leaving. The door opened halfway and the music teacher, Miss Clara, stepped out. She didn't see Ethan at first, then noticed the small boy standing quietly near the wall. "Ethan," she said gently, "what are you doing here, dear?" Ethan turned his head toward her voice and smiled shyly. "I was just listening," he said softly. "The piano sounds like magic." Miss Clara looked surprised. Then she knew Ethan, everyone in the school did. She bent down beside him and said, "Do you like music?" Ethan nodded eagerly. "I've never played before, but it feels like I can see it when I hear it." Miss Clara's eyes softened. She took his small hand and guided it toward the piano. "Would you like to touch it?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded again. She helped him sit on the bench and placed his fingers gently on the keys. "These," she said, "are black and white keys. Each one makes a different sound. Go ahead. Press one." Ethan pressed a single white key. A clean note filled the air. His lips parted in wonder. "It's alive," he whispered, pressing another, then another. Each note felt different under his fingers. Each vibration tickled his fingertips. Miss Clara smiled, watching him. She could see something in his expression. A quiet fire. A pure connection. She had seen many children play piano before, but never one who felt it like this. After a few minutes, she said gently, "All right, Ethan, that's enough for today. You can come again sometime if you like, but only when I'm here, okay?" Ethan nodded, though inside he already knew he would come back. The moment he touched the piano, it was as if his world had changed. He could feel something calling to him, something that wanted to be heard. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, listening to the rain tapping against the window. Each drop sounded like a tiny piano key. He imagined himself sitting on that bench again, playing songs that could make people smile. He didn't need eyes to see, he only needed to listen. The next day, during lunch break, Ethan quietly walked back to the music room. He stood at the door and listened. No one was inside, the room was silent. He slowly opened the door and stepped in, closing it behind him. His heart beat faster as he made his way toward the piano. He remembered exactly where it was. Every sound, every echo of the room guided him. He sat down and touched the keys again. The smooth surface felt familiar now. He pressed one note, then another, trying to remember what Miss Clara had played. It wasn't perfect. His timing was off and some notes didn't sound right. But Ethan didn't care. He could feel the difference. His ears told him when something was wrong, and his hands searched for what was right. He tried again, slower this time, listening carefully to every sound. Suddenly the door creaked open, and a group of older boys peeked inside. They whispered to each other and laughed. "Look, the blind boy thinks he's Mozart," one said under his breath. Ethan froze, unsure what to do. "Hey," another boy said jokingly, "if he plays something real, I'll buy him a piano." The others burst out laughing, slapping each other's backs, then they walked away, leaving their laughter echoing in the hallway. Ethan's chest tightened, but he didn't cry. Instead, he placed his hands back on the keys. The laughter faded behind him, replaced by the soft echo of sound. He pressed one note, then another, repeating the same pattern over and over. "If I can play," he whispered to himself, "I'll make them listen." When Miss Clara returned later, she found him still sitting there, lost in concentration. His small fingers moved slowly but with purpose. She stood at the door, quietly watching. Her heart swelled with emotion. Ethan wasn't just curious, and he was meant to do this. After school, when his mother came to pick him up, Ethan ran to her with a smile. "Mama," he said excitedly, "I touched the piano again, and it talked to me." His mother looked puzzled but smiled anyway. "Talk to you?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes, it said not to stop." That night, as the moonlight slipped through the curtains, Ethan dreamed of the piano. He dreamed of a stage filled with light, of people listening quietly, of music that made even laughter turn into tears. The next day, he promised himself that he would return, not to prove the boys wrong, but to make the piano truly speak. And though he didn't know it yet, that promise would change his life forever. The next morning, the sky was pale and quiet. The school bell rang like every other day, but for Ethan, this day felt different. Something inside him had changed. The sound of the piano still echoed in his mind, and no matter how much he tried to focus in class, his thoughts kept drifting back to that room, that sound, that feeling. It was as if the piano had left a light burning inside him that refused to go out. When lunch break came, Ethan didn't sit under his favorite tree like he usually did. Instead, he followed the familiar sound of footsteps and voices until he reached the music room again. The door was slightly open, and he could smell the same wooden scent mixed with a hint of polish. The room was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the old ceiling fan. Ethan smiled to himself, took a deep breath, and walked in. He ran his fingers gently over the piano keys, tracing their cool, smooth surface. He pressed one key and a soft note filled the room. It was like a whisper, quiet, shy, but alive. He pressed another and another, slowly forming small patterns of sound. The notes weren't perfect, but they felt right. He was learning by heart, listening to the vibrations, letting his fingers remember what his ears told them. Then the door burst open and laughter filled the air. Ethan froze, his heart jumped. 3 boys stood at the door, older than him, loud and careless. They were the same ones who had teased him the day before. "Look, the blind boy's at it again," one of them said, trying not to laugh. Another snickered. "Careful. He might play Beethoven next." They all laughed. But one boy, tall and sharp-eyed, stepped forward with a smirk. "If he plays, I'll buy him a piano," he joked. The others roared with laughter. Ethan didn't move. His small hands rested on the keys, trembling. His face turned slightly toward the sound of their voices. He could hear their laughter echoing around him like cold wind. It hurt, not because they laughed, but because he wanted them to hear what he heard. He wanted them to know that music wasn't about seeing. It was about feeling. The boys finally left, still joking among themselves. The door swung shut behind them and silence returned. Ethan sat there for a long time, his heart heavy but not broken. Then he whispered softly to himself, "If I can play, they won't laugh again." He pressed a key, one note, then another. The sound filled the empty room like a small act of defiance. Each note became a promise. His fingers stumbled, missed, and tried again. He wasn't playing a song. He was searching for one. He didn't need sheet music. His ears became his teacher. The piano became his world, and he lost himself inside it. As the sun dipped lower, the door creaked open again. It was Mr. Harris, the school janitor, an old man with kind eyes and a slow walk. He had been cleaning nearby and had heard the faint sound of music. "You again?" he said softly. Ethan turned toward his voice, startled. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't be here. I just wanted to listen." Mr. Harris walked closer and placed a hand on the piano. "You weren't just listening, boy," he said with a small smile. "You were playing." Ethan hesitated. "I don't know how," he whispered. I feel it." The old man nodded thoughtfully. Feeling it is how every great musician begins, he said, pulling up a chair. Do you want to learn properly? Ethan tilted his head, unsure. Can I? He asked, almost afraid to believe it. Mr. Harris chuckled. You can learn anything if you want to. He placed Ethan's small hands correctly on the keys. Now try again, he said gently. Guiding him through a simple pattern, Ethan followed the sound carefully, his fingers shaky at first but growing steadier with every note. For the next few days, Ethan returned secretly after school. Mr. Harris stayed behind to sweep and clean, but really, he was there to teach. He showed Ethan how to recognize tones, how to move his fingers smoothly, and how to feel rhythm through vibrations. They didn't use books or notes and only sound. Touch and patience. Ethan's progress amazed even himself. Every day he played a little better, his ears caught every mistake, and his hands learned faster than words could explain. He laughed softly whenever he got something right, his joy filling the room. Mr. Harris often sat nearby, listening with closed eyes. You've got a gift, son, he would say, the kind that doesn't need eyes to see. But not everyone saw it that way. One afternoon, as Ethan practiced, the same boys passed by again. They stopped outside the door. Listening, the tall one whispered, He's actually trying. Another laughed. Still sounds like a cat walking on the piano. Ethan heard them. Every word, his fingers hesitated for a second. But he didn't stop. He kept playing, letting the notes rise louder, stronger, until finally, the boys' laughter faded down the hallway. Mr. Harris came in a few minutes later and found Ethan still sitting there, silent tears on his cheeks. They laughed again, didn't they? He asked softly. Ethan nodded. They said I can't play. Mr. Harris knelt beside him and said firmly, You don't need to prove them wrong today. You just need to keep playing until one day. They listened. Those words stayed in Ethan's heart. He wiped his tears and smiled a little. Then I'll play until they hear me, he whispered. From that day, the music room became his secret world. Every key he touched was a step closer to the dream he didn't yet understand. The laughter of others became faint echoes behind him. The only sound that mattered now was the voice of the piano, his friend, his teacher, his light in the dark, and though they had said it as a joke, if he plays, I'll buy him a piano. Those words would one day come true, not as laughter, but as a promise fulfilled by the sound of a blind boy's courage. After that day, Ethan began to live two different lives. During school hours, he was the quiet blind boy everyone pitied, the one who sat alone, smiled politely and never caused trouble. But when the final bell rang, a different Ethan came alive. The moment he heard the halls grow quiet and the footsteps fade, his world changed. He would grip his white cane, count the steps to the music room, and push open the old wooden door to his secret universe. The room smelled of polish and paper, and the piano waited like an old friend. It never judged him, never laughed, never turned away. It simply waited to sing when his fingers touched it each evening. The sunlight faded through the window and painted golden warmth across the keys. Ethan could not see it, but he could feel it. He could sense the light in the air, the same way he sensed kindness in a person's voice. Mr. Harris, the old janitor, had become more than a teacher to him. He was like a guardian angel, gruff but gentle, with stories from another lifetime. He had once played in a band long ago. Before his hands grew stiff now, he spent his evenings sweeping the halls and guiding a boy who couldn't see but could feel music like no one else. Let's start with what you heard yesterday, Mr. Harris said one afternoon. His voice soft but firm. Ethan nodded eagerly. Placing his fingers on the keys, he pressed one note, then another, slowly building the melody from memory. The sound echoed sweet and shaky at first, but Mr. Harris didn't interrupt. He waited, watching the boy's head tilt slightly, listening deeply, adjusting his touch by sound alone. After a while, Ethan sighed. I made mistakes again. Mr. Harris chuckled. Good, that means you're learning. Only the ones who try make mistakes. Boy, Ethan smiled, feeling his way along the keys. I want to play like the teacher, he said softly. Miss Clara, the way her music sounds like a story. You'll play better than that someday, Mr. Harris said, because you're not just hearing music, or you're seeing it inside your heart. From then on, Ethan practiced every single day. His mother thought he was just staying late to help the janitor. She didn't know her son was slowly turning into a musician. Sometimes he'd stay so long that the lights would flicker off, and Mr. Harris would say, That's enough, lad. Even the piano needs rest. Ethan would laugh, tired but happy. Weeks passed, and his playing grew richer, clearer, and more emotional. He didn't know the names of the chords or the rules of music, but somehow his fingers always found the right keys. He was learning through instinct, through sound, through heart, but not everyone understood. One evening, when Ethan was practicing alone, Mr. Harris had gone to fix a light in another hall. Two teachers happened to pass by. They stopped and listened from the door. The woman whispered, "Who's that playing?" "That's the blind boy, Ethan," the man replied quietly. "He comes here after school." The woman sighed. "Poor child, wasting time. He should focus on his studies, not dreams he'll never see." Ethan couldn't see them, but he heard every word. Each syllable fell like a stone into his chest. His fingers froze. The air suddenly felt heavy. He sat there, silent, letting the echo of their voices fade into nothing. When Mr. Harris returned, he noticed the boy's stillness. "What's wrong, son?" he asked. Ethan shook his head slowly. "They said that I shouldn't waste time." Mr. Harris sighed and sat down beside him. "Do you know what people used to tell me when I played saxophone?" Ethan turned toward him. "What?" "They said, 'You'll never make it,'" Mr. Harris said, smiling softly. "But I did for a while. And even when the world stopped listening, I never stopped playing, because it wasn't for them. It was for me." Ethan stayed quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Then I'll play for me too." That night his music changed. It became stronger, fuller, deeper. Every note had emotion behind it: joy, sadness, hope, and fire. The piano room echoed with sounds that no one had taught him. They were born inside him, raw and beautiful. A few days later, Miss Clara discovered their secret. She had returned to collect her notebook and heard the sound of the piano down the hall. Curious, she peeked inside and froze. Ethan was sitting at the bench, playing one of her pieces, not perfectly, but with heart so pure that it made her eyes sting. When he finished, she stepped inside slowly. "Ethan," she said softly, "where did you learn that?" He jumped slightly. "Oh, Miss Clara, and I was just trying to remember what you played." "You did more than remember," she whispered, walking closer. "You felt it." Mr. Harris stood nearby, smiling quietly. "The boy's got something rare, Clara, something even you can't teach." Miss Clara sat beside Ethan, listening as he played again. Her hands trembled slightly. "Would you like me to teach you properly?" she asked after a long pause. Ethan's face lit up. "Really? You'd teach me?" She nodded. "Yes, but only if you promise me one thing." "What's that?" he asked. "Promise that you'll never stop, even when people doubt you," she said gently. "Because people always doubt what they can't understand." Ethan nodded, his voice firm. "I promise." From then on, the secret lessons continued, sometimes with Miss Clara, sometimes with Mr. Harris. The boy who once sat quietly in the corner now filled the empty halls with music that spoke without words. Each note carried the sound of his soul, and though no one knew it yet, those after-school sessions, the laughter, the mistakes, the tears, and the echoes in that little room were shaping something extraordinary, something that would soon reach far beyond that small school. Because when a blind boy listens to his heart louder than the world's laughter, even destiny has no choice but to stop and listen. The weeks passed, and autumn came quietly. The wind carried the scent of rain, and fallen leaves crunched underfoot. At school, children talked about the upcoming annual talent show, a big event where everyone performed something special. Some danced, some sang, and others acted out funny skits. The halls buzzed with excitement, but for Ethan, it was just another day, until Miss Clara mentioned it. She found him one afternoon in the music room, sitting at the piano with his fingers gliding gently over the keys. He wasn't playing a song this time. He was experimenting, creating sounds that felt warm and soft. Miss Clara stood in silence, listening. When he finished, she clapped quietly. "Ethan," she said gently, "have you ever thought about performing at the school talent show?" Ethan turned his head toward her voice, a little startled. "Me?" he asked, almost laughing. I can't even see the crowd. She smiled. You don't need to see them, you just need to let them hear you. The words sank deep into his heart. He hesitated for a long time, his fingers resting still on the keys. What if they laugh again? He whispered, his voice soft. What if they think it's funny? A blind boy trying to play. Miss Clara knelt beside him, her voice warm and steady. Ethan, the only thing they'll hear is your music, not your blindness. And if they can't understand that, then that's their loss, not yours. For the first time, Ethan imagined himself not as the boy in the corner, but standing in front of everyone, his hands moving across the piano. His heart raced with both fear and hope. If I do it, he asked shyly, will you help me? Miss Clara smiled. Every step of the way. That evening, she told Mr. Harris the plan. The old janitor grinned and said, well, about time the world hears him, isn't it? Together, they decided to help Ethan prepare. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of secret lessons. Every afternoon after school, Ethan practiced in the music room. Miss Clara guided him through songs that balanced beauty and simplicity. Mr. Harris, meanwhile, tapped his old broom in rhythm, keeping time like a metronome. Don't just play the notes, boy, he said often. Play the feeling, that's what people remember. Ethan worked harder than ever before. His fingers ached sometimes, but he didn't stop. When he made mistakes, he laughed and tried again. When he finally played something right, he grinned with pride. The piano keys had become his best friends. Each one had a voice of its own. Some soft like whispers, others deep like thunder. At night, he practiced in his mind. Lying in bed with his hands resting on the blanket, he imagined each note, each chord, each breath of the melody. His mother sometimes peeked into his room, wondering what he was thinking. Are you okay, sweetheart? She'd ask. He'd smile. I'm just listening. To what? She'd ask. To the song I haven't played yet, he'd whisper. Finally, the day of the talent show arrived. The school auditorium was packed. Parents, students, and teachers filled every seat. Laughter, chatter, and excitement buzzed through the air. On stage, colorful lights flickered and the big red curtain swayed slightly. Ethan sat backstage, holding his cane tightly. Miss Clara knelt beside him, adjusting his collar. You're ready, she said softly. Just remember, the piano knows you, trust it. Ethan nodded, though his heart was pounding so fast it almost hurt. He could hear the muffled sound of applause from the audience as another student finished their performance. Then someone announced, and next, we have Ethan, from Class 4B. The crowd clapped politely, though a few whispers rippled through the room. Isn't that the blind boy? Can he really play? Ethan heard the faint murmurs, but Miss Clara's hand on his shoulder steadied him. Go, she whispered. He walked carefully across the stage, guided by sound. The microphone picked up his small footsteps, and the audience fell silent. He reached the piano and sat down, taking a deep breath. His hands hovered over the keys. They trembled for a moment, then stilled. The first note came soft and unsure, like a whisper in the dark. Then another followed, then another. The melody began to bloom slowly, filling the hall with something pure and gentle. The audience leaned forward, drawn in. Each note carried a story of struggle, hope, and light. Ethan wasn't playing a song anymore. He was speaking through music, telling them what words could never say. The same boys who had mocked him sat in the front row, their laughter now gone, their eyes wide, their faces still. As Ethan's fingers danced over the keys, something inside them shifted. They realized that the blind boy they had laughed at could see things they never could, things inside the heart. When the last note faded into silence, Ethan froze. He couldn't see the audience, couldn't read their faces. For a moment he thought maybe they hadn't liked it, but then the sound of clapping began, soft at first, then louder and louder, until the whole hall was on its feet, cheering and crying. Miss Clara wiped her tears backstage, whispering, You did it, Ethan. Mr. Harris clapped his rough hands together, shouting, That's my boy. Ethan smiled faintly, his fingers still resting on the piano keys. "Did they like it?" he asked. Miss Clara walked up to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "They didn't just like it, Ethan," she said. "They heard you." And as he stood up to bow, a voice from the crowd shouted, half laughing, half crying, "I'll buy him that piano." The hall erupted again in laughter and applause. But this time it wasn't cruel. It was full of pride, full of awe. Ethan didn't know who shouted it, and he didn't care. He just smiled through his tears. Because that night, for the first time, the boy who once sat alone in the corner had filled an entire room with light. And the world finally had listened. The night of the performance changed everything, yet Ethan didn't realize it right away. To him, it felt like a dream that ended too soon. The applause still echoed in his ears long after he went home. His fingers were sore, but his heart felt light, lighter than it had ever been. He could still hear the sound of people cheering, the laughter, the clapping, and that one voice shouting, "I'll buy him that piano." He lay in bed that night, eyes closed, a small smile on his lips. "They heard me," he whispered to himself. His mother peeked into his room and saw him smiling in his sleep. She didn't understand what had happened yet, but she could sense that something special had awakened in her son. The next morning, the whole school was talking about him. Students who once ignored him now whispered his name in the corridors. "Did you hear him play?" How could he do that without seeing? It was beautiful. The teachers smiled at him in the hall, patting his shoulder and calling him our little musician. But Ethan didn't act proud or boastful. He just smiled shyly and said, "Thank you," before heading straight to the music room. He wanted to touch the piano again, to relive the feeling. When his fingers met the keys, he pressed one softly and listened to its echo. "You did it," he whispered to the instrument as if it could hear him. "We did it." Later that day, Miss Clara found him there. She was holding something in her hand, a small golden trophy. "This is for you, Ethan," she said warmly, placing it on the piano. "The school wanted to thank you for your performance last night." Ethan reached out. Touching the cool metal, his fingers traced the engraved words. "Outstanding performance, Ethan Miller." He smiled. "It's beautiful," he said softly. Mr. Harris walked in behind her, his broom over his shoulder. "A trophy, huh?" he said with a grin. "Well, that's nice, but you know what's better?" Ethan tilted his head. "What?" "Knowing that you made people feel something," the old man said. "That's the real prize, lad," Ethan nodded, letting the words sink in. He didn't need sight to feel proud. His pride came from sound, from the invisible applause that still lived in his memory. That week, something even more surprising happened. The principal called Ethan and his mother into her office. She smiled warmly. "Ethan," she said, "the entire town heard about your performance. A local music foundation wants to sponsor you. They're sending a piano for you, your very own." Ethan's mother gasped. Covering her mouth in disbelief, Ethan froze for a second, unsure if he heard correctly. "A piano for me?" "Yes," the principal said. "They said every child with a gift deserves a chance to grow it." When they returned home that evening, Ethan couldn't stop smiling. "Mama, can we put it by the window?" he asked eagerly. "So I can feel the sunlight when I play." His mother hugged him tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, my love," she said. "Anywhere you want." Days later, the piano arrived, a beautiful upright instrument, polished and shining. The delivery men carefully placed it near the window. Ethan ran his fingers along the edges, tracing the shape. He pressed one key. It rang out clear and warm. The same sound that had changed his life. His mother stood behind him, watching as his small hands moved confidently across the keys. She couldn't help but cry. Not out of sadness, but pride. From then on, the music never stopped. Every morning before school and every night before bed, Ethan played. Sometimes soft melodies that sounded like morning sunlight. Other times deep songs that carried the sound of rain. His home became filled with music, and soon, people began to stop outside their house to listen through the open window. One afternoon, Miss Clara visited. She sat quietly in the corner, listening as Ethan played a new tune he had created. It wasn't perfect, but it had emotion. "What do you call that?" she asked when he finished. Ethan thought for a moment. "The sound of light," he said, smiling. She blinked back tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You're beautiful, Ethan." Mr. Harris visited too, though he still pretended to be grumpy. "You've gone and made me cry, boy," he said, rubbing his eyes. "An old man shouldn't be feeling things this deeply." Ethan laughed softly. Then I must be playing right. But fame wasn't what Ethan wanted. He didn't dream of stages or trophies. He just wanted to keep playing, to feel the music inside him grow. Sometimes he would sit for hours, eyes closed, his face calm, as if he were listening to a secret only he could hear. Yet deep down, a small part of him still remembered the laughter, the boys who had mocked him. The words, "If he plays, I'll buy him a piano," replayed in his mind sometimes. But now, those words didn't hurt anymore. They reminded him how far he had come, how sound had built a bridge between mockery and respect. One day when he returned to school, those same boys approached him. The tall one, the ringleader, scratched his head awkwardly. "Hey, Ethan," he muttered. "We were jerks before, I just wanted to say. That song you played? It was amazing." Ethan turned toward the sound of his voice, his expression soft. "Thank you," he said simply. "You helped me without knowing it." The boy frowned, confused. "Helped you?" Ethan nodded. "If you hadn't said what you did, I might never have tried to play." The boy stood silent for a moment, then smiled. "You're something else, man." After that day, Ethan wasn't the blind boy anymore. He was the musician. The halls that once echoed with laughter now carried his name with admiration. Miss Clara began to teach him advanced techniques. Mr. Harris showed him old jazz records, and his mother saved every spare coin for his music classes. As the sun set each evening, Ethan played by the window, his songs drifting into the town square. His neighbors often stopped to listen, whispering to each other, "That's the blind boy who plays like an angel." And every time his fingers touched the keys, Ethan smiled quietly because he knew the music that once came from pain now carried only peace. The same world that once pitied him now listened, truly listened. He was no longer the boy in the corner, no longer the joke in the hallway. He was Ethan, the boy who turned laughter into music, silence into applause, and darkness into sound. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of gold and red, the light warm on Ethan's face as he sat by the window, his fingers gliding effortlessly across the piano keys. Each note flowed like water, gentle but sure. The melody he played was new, something he had written himself. It spoke of light after darkness, of finding color in a world without sight. His mother stood quietly in the doorway, a hand pressed to her heart, listening with tears in her eyes. It had been months since the talent show, and Ethan's world had changed more than he could ever imagine. He was no longer the quiet boy people whispered about in pity. Now they whispered his name with awe. The whole town knew about the blind boy who played like he could see the soul of the world. Newspapers had written small articles about him. Local radio had even mentioned his name. But for Ethan, fame wasn't the goal. He still saw himself as the boy in the music room, just older, braver, and more in love with the sound that had changed his life. One chilly afternoon, Miss Clara came to visit. She watched as Ethan played his new composition, her eyes glistening when he finished. She clapped softly. "That was beautiful." "Ethan," she said, "what do you call it?" He smiled and said softly, "The sound of forgiveness." She tilted her head. "Forgiveness?" "Yes," Ethan said, "for the boys who laughed, for the teachers who doubted me, for the people who saw my blindness before my music." Miss Clara smiled proudly. "You've grown so much, Ethan. You've turned every hurt into harmony." That week, the school decided to hold a special concert, a charity event to raise funds for children with disabilities. When the principal asked Ethan to perform again, he agreed instantly. But this time he wanted to do something different. "I want to play a song for everyone who ever felt invisible," he told Miss Clara. "For those who were laughed at, for those who dream quietly, like I did the night of the concert arrived." The hall was even fuller than before, not just students and teachers, but people from all over town, families, reporters, and strangers came just to hear him play. The same stage that had once terrified Ethan now felt like home. He could sense the crowd's excitement in the air, the soft rustle of clothing, the quiet whispers, the sound of people holding their breath. Backstage, Miss Clara knelt beside him, adjusting the collar of his shirt like she had done months ago. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Ethan smiled. A little, he admitted, but it's a good kind of nervous. She laughed softly. Then you're ready? When his name was called. The audience erupted in applause even before he stepped onto the stage. He walked carefully, guided by sound, the creak of the wooden floor, the low hum of the microphone, the faint cough in the back row. Every sound painted a picture for him, and in that picture he felt safe. He sat down at the piano and took a deep breath. His fingers rested on the keys, still and waiting for a long moment. There was silence, the kind that fills a room with anticipation. Then he began. The first note was soft, like a whisper between two friends. Then another joined it, and another, building into a melody that shimmered like morning light. The music rose and fell, sometimes gentle like the wind, sometimes strong like the sea. It told his story. The loneliness, the laughter, the pain, and the hope. Each note carried a memory. Each sound painted a piece of his heart. The audience sat in complete silence. No one moved, no one whispered. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Miss Clara stood near the side of the stage, her eyes shining with tears. Mr. Harris, standing in the back with his broom in hand, smiled proudly, whispering to himself, "That's my boy." As the final part of the song began, Ethan played with all his soul. His fingers danced across the keys. Faster now, full of life, the melody grew brighter, until it felt like light itself was singing. When the last note finally rang out, it lingered in the air, trembling softly before fading into silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room exploded into applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some had tears in their eyes, others simply smiled. Overwhelmed, it was louder than any applause Ethan had ever heard. The sound wrapped around him like a warm embrace. He bowed his head slightly, his hands still resting on the piano. "Thank you," he whispered almost to himself. Miss Clara rushed onto the stage, hugging him tightly. "You did it again," she said. "You made them feel what you feel." Ethan smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." Then, from the front row, a familiar voice shouted, "Hey! I'm keeping my promise. I'll buy him that piano." It was the same boy who had once mocked him, the one who had laughed the loudest. The audience laughed, but this time it wasn't cruel. It was joyful, honest, full of admiration. Ethan turned his head toward the voice and smiled. "You already did," he said softly. "You just didn't know it then." The crowd quieted for a moment, realizing the depth of his words. And then the applause began again, louder than before. The sound of clapping filled the hall like thunder. After the show, people surrounded him, wanting to shake his hand, to tell him how his music had touched them. One woman said, "I haven't cried like that in years," another man said. "You reminded me that beauty doesn't need sight." Ethan listened quietly, humbled by every word. That night, as he sat by the window at home, his fingers playing softly on his new piano, he thought about everything that had happened. He wasn't angry at the world anymore. The pain, the laughter, the loneliness, they had all shaped his music. They had made him who he was. His mother came and sat beside him, listening. "What are you playing now?" she asked. He smiled. "It doesn't have a name yet." "What's it about?" she asked softly. Ethan tilted his head, thinking for a moment. "It's about the silence that comes after applause," he said quietly. "The kind that tells you everything was worth it." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the soft sound of his music into the night. And somewhere deep in his heart, Ethan knew. He had finally found his voice. Not through words, not through sight, but through the sound that had always been waiting inside him. The morning after the concert, the world felt new to Ethan. The air outside was cool and bright, and though he couldn't see the sunlight, he could feel it. Warm and soft on his face. It felt like the world itself was smiling at him. His mother was already awake, humming in the kitchen, and the smell of pancakes drifted through the air. She had barely slept, her heart still overflowing with pride. When Ethan came downstairs, she pulled him into a hug so tight he laughed. "You were amazing, sweetheart," she said. "Everyone's still talking about you." Ethan grinned shyly. "I just played," he said softly. The piano did the rest, but he could sense something different that morning. Not just at home, but everywhere. His phone kept ringing. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate him. Even strangers sent letters saying how his performance had touched their hearts. One note said, "You reminded me that beauty doesn't need eyes, only heart." Ethan read it slowly, his fingers brushing the paper as if he could feel the emotion trapped in the ink. A few days later, the mayor invited him to play at a town event. Miss Clara and Mr. Harris were both bursting with pride. "You see, lad," Mr. Harris said, patting his shoulder. "You've done what most folks only dream of. You've made people feel." Miss Clara smiled warmly. "And this is just the beginning, Ethan," she said. "The world is starting to hear you." That night, Ethan sat at his piano again, thinking about those words. The keys felt different now. Not just instruments of sound, but pieces of his life. Each one held a memory. The first time he'd touched a note. The laughter of the boys, the lessons, the tears, the applause. He pressed a soft chord, letting it linger. "You've given me everything," he whispered to the piano. "Now it's my turn to give something back." The following week, he performed at the town hall. The place was filled with people, families, teachers, even those who had once doubted him. The stage lights glowed faintly through his closed eyes, and he smiled, remembering his promise. He played a new piece that night, something gentle and full of warmth. When the last note faded, the audience rose to their feet again, not just in applause but in awe. After the performance, an older man approached him. "Ethan," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm from the City Music Academy. I'd like to offer you a scholarship, full support for your studies." Ethan froze. Unsure what to say, he felt Miss Clara's hand on his shoulder. Steady and warm. "Take it, Ethan," she whispered. "You've earned it." He turned toward the man's voice and smiled. "Thank you, sir, I'll make you proud." Life moved quickly after that. Ethan began traveling to the city on weekends for lessons. His world grew bigger, full of new sounds and faces. His teachers there were amazed by his talent. "He doesn't read notes," one said. "He feels them." But no matter how far he went, Ethan never forgot where he began. That quiet school music room, the dusty piano, the laughter that turned into applause. Back in his hometown, people still told the story of the blind boy who played. Some said his music healed sadness. Others said it made them see the world differently. Children looked up to him inspired. And Ethan? He just smiled and kept playing. One rainy afternoon, he returned to the old school. The hallways smelled the same, chalk, paper, and memories. He found the music room unlocked and stepped inside. The old piano still stood in the corner, slightly out of tune. He ran his fingers across it and chuckled softly. "You're still here," he said. "Just like me." He sat down and began to play a slow, nostalgic melody. Each note echoed through the empty room like a voice from the past. It was the song he had played the first day he dared to touch those keys. Back then, his fingers had trembled now. They moved with calm confidence as he played. Mr. Harris appeared in the doorway. His hair grayer, his steps slower, still haunting this place. "I see," he teased. Ethan laughed. "I could never forget it," he said, standing up to hug him. "You started this," Mr. Harris shook his head. "No, boy, you did." "I just kept the lights on." They sat together for a while, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. "You know, Ethan," Mr. Harris said softly, "sometimes life gives us pain so we can turn it into something beautiful." Ethan smiled. "Then I guess my music is made of a lot of pain." The old man chuckled. "Maybe so, but it's also made of courage, and that's rarer." Before leaving, Ethan pressed one last chord on the piano, letting the sound fill the room. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me how to see the years past." And Ethan's name grew beyond the little town. He became a composer, writing songs that touched hearts across the world. People would often ask him during interviews, "How do you create music so full of emotion?" And he'd always smile and say, "Because I play what I feel, not what I see." But no matter how famous he became, he never forgot his promise to give back. He started a small foundation that provided instruments to children with disabilities. He called it The Sound of Light, the same name as his favorite song. Every year he visited schools, sitting with children who reminded him of his younger self, guiding their hands on the keys and saying softly, "You don't need eyes to see beauty, just heart." One day, while performing at a charity concert, Ethan paused between songs and spoke to the audience. "When I was little," he said with a smile, "someone once joked that if I could play, they'd buy me a piano. They laughed, but they didn't know that those words would change my life. So tonight, I play for that boy, for every child who's ever been laughed at for dreaming." He began to play again, his fingers moving gracefully. The melody rose, filled with light and peace. The audience sat in silence, many with tears in their eyes. The notes told his story, of laughter turned into applause, Pain turned into strength and blindness turned into vision. As the final note faded, the hall stood in silence for a heartbeat before erupting into applause. Ethan smiled, bowing his head slightly. The sound filled his heart like it always did. Warm, endless, alive, and in that moment he knew. The boy who once sat alone in the corner, afraid to be heard, had finally played for the whole world. And the world at last and was listening.